The first scream shattered the silence of the night, followed by the slam of a fist against wood. She froze in the dark, heart pounding, as her father's rage tore through the fragile walls of their home. Every shadow became a threat, every breath a risk. For years, fear had been her prison, but on that night, fate would place a stranger at her door and change everything. Morning came not with peace, but with the heavy tread of boots pacing across warped wooden floors. She stirred before dawn as she always did, careful to make the fire glow in the hearth before her father roused, careful not to give him cause to bark or strike. The air in the cabin was bitter with smoke and the stale scent of whiskey, a smell that clung to the man like a curse. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured water into the pot, the quiet clink of metal nearly deafening in the silence. Every sound mattered here. Every misstep could wake the storm. When he entered the room, shoulders broad, beard unkempt, eyes sunken with restless fury, she kept her head low. He grunted, gesturing toward the door. "Wood!" Just one word, but it was enough. She wrapped her shawl around her thin shoulders and stepped into the cold dawn. The world outside was muted, painted in shades of frost and pale light. For a brief moment she breathed freely, air filling her chest without the weight of his presence pressing down. But freedom lasted only as long as the chore. Her father's shadow loomed even when he wasn't near. Neighbors whispered about him, how he'd been a soldier, how the war had hollowed him out, leaving nothing but anger behind. To her, though, he was not just a man broken by battle. He was a cage, a man whose love had withered into suspicion, whose protection had twisted into possession. She stacked the wood carefully, her fingers stiff from cold, her mind wandering into forbidden thoughts. What would it be like to live without fear? To speak without watching every word? To laugh without the echo of a slammed fist silencing her? Her mother had once filled the house with song, her voice soft and strong. But after she passed, silence became the only language spoken. Silence and the occasional crash of rage. When she returned inside, the stew was simmering, the air thick with heat. Her father sat at the table staring at her with eyes that seemed to burn straight through. She placed the bowl before him, hands steady only by willpower. "You've been outside longer than needed," he muttered. "Talking to someone?" Her throat tightened. "No, sir. Just gathering wood." He leaned closer, the scar on his cheek catching the light. "I hear lies in your tone," her heart raced. "I'm not lying." The silence stretched heavy as iron chains. Then with a grunt he sat back, tearing into the food. She exhaled softly, relief flooding her body. Another storm avoided, for now. But fear had a way of growing roots, and tonight would bring another reckoning. She knew it the way she knew the cold seeping into her bones. Constant, inescapable. At night, when the fire burned low and his snores rattled through the cabin, she lay awake staring at the rafters. The loneliness pressed down on her chest as cruelly as his anger did. Somewhere, beyond these woods, beyond his watchful eyes, life had to be different. She closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, a prayer only she could hear. Please, let there be more than this. And though she didn't know it yet, her prayer was already on its way. A stranger was riding toward her life, carrying with him the possibility of everything she thought she'd never have. Kindness, freedom, and the dangerous promise of love. The day stretched long, heavy with unspoken tension. Every creak of the cabin's boards, every clang of the pot, felt like a test she might fail. Her father sat by the window, polishing the rifle he kept closer than a friend. His eyes, sharp and restless, followed her every move as if daring her to make a mistake. She scrubbed the wooden floor with raw hands, the bucket of cold water numbing her knuckles. Each stroke of the rag felt like erasing herself, piece by piece. She wasn't his daughter anymore. She was his servant, his prisoner. Faster, he growled. Her arms ached, but she quickened the pace, not daring to meet his gaze. He liked to see her fear. It fed something inside him, something dark. Suddenly the door banged open. A gust of wind swept in, scattering ash from the hearth. Her father stood, rifle in hand, before the door had even finished swinging. But it wasn't an intruder, just the storm outside, the latch loosened by age. Still, his anger had found a target. "You didn't fix the hinge like I told you." Her lips parted. She wanted to remind him he'd never given her tools, that he'd forbidden her to touch the hammer. But the words died in her throat. Excuses were fuel for his rage. Instead, she lowered her gaze. "I'll fix it tomorrow." The back of his hand struck faster than she could flinch. Pain seared her cheek, the taste of copper filling her mouth. She staggered but didn't cry out. Crying made it worse. He loomed over her, voice a low snarl. "Don't talk back. Don't ever." She nodded, swallowing the hurt, pressing trembling fingers to her cheek. He sat again as if nothing had happened, the rifle gleaming in his lap. To him, this was order. To her, it was chains. Hours later, after chores were done and the cabin fell quiet, she slipped outside. The night air was cold, the moon casting pale light across the clearing. She pressed a hand to her swollen cheek, eyes stinging with tears she'd never let him see. For a moment, she let herself imagine running. Beyond the trees lay towns she'd only heard of, rivers that could carry her away. But fear tethered her, stronger than rope. Where would she go, with what? The wilderness was as dangerous as her father, and she had neither money nor allies. A sudden sound broke her thoughts. Hooves in the distance, faint but steady. She froze, listening. Someone was out there, moving through the night. A traveler? A drifter. Maybe just a passing rider. Her father's warning echoed in her head. Strangers mean trouble. You stay away. But something inside her stirred, a fragile spark of hope. Strangers also meant possibility. She lingered in the doorway, heart thudding as the hoofbeats faded into the dark. Whoever it was, they hadn't seen her, not yet. But she felt it deep in her bones. Fate was shifting, like a storm gathering at the horizon. When she returned inside, her father was already asleep in his chair, the rifle resting across his knees. She crept past him, silent as a ghost, and lay down on her narrow cot. Her body was tired, but her mind raced. She touched her cheek where the bruise would bloom by morning and whispered into the shadows, "I can't live like this forever." And though the night swallowed her words, the truth of them lingered. Something had to break, something would. Dawn broke pale and cold, the light spilling weakly through the cracks in the cabin wall. She rose before her father, slipping quietly into her boots and shawl. Her cheek throbbed where his hand had left its mark, the skin tender and bruised. She pressed her fingers there and winced, but the pain only sharpened her resolve. The world outside was hushed, the air crisp with the scent of dew and pine. She gathered kindling near the woodpile, her breath forming clouds in the chill. Every sound carried, branches cracking, the river's steady murmur, the distant caw of a crow. And then hooves again. Her heart jumped, chest tightening with the memory of last night's fleeting sounds. This time they were closer, deliberate. She froze, a bundle of sticks in her arms, straining to see through the trees. Out of the morning mist came a rider, a man on a chestnut horse, tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders wrapped in a weathered duster. His hat cast his face in shadow, but as he drew nearer, she caught sight of eyes that glimmered with a quiet intensity. Sharp, searching and tired, as though they had seen too much of the world. She should have run. Her father's warning screamed in her head, "Strangers mean trouble. Keep your distance." But her feet refused to move. The horse slowed at the edge of the clearing, nostrils flaring, hooves crunching on frost. The man dismounted with a fluid ease, boots sinking into the damp earth. He looked at her, not past her, not through her, but at her as if she were more than a shadow of herself. "Morning," he said, voice low and steady. Her throat tightened. "Morning." He gave a small nod, eyes flicking to the bruise on her cheek. Something hardened in his expression, though he said nothing of it. Instead, he asked, "Is there a road nearby?" My map's worn thin. She hesitated. If her father woke and saw them talking. But the man's presence stirred something dangerous inside her. Trust. "There's a trail," she whispered, pointing east. "It'll take you toward town." His gaze lingered on her, heavy with unspoken questions. He seemed to sense the weight she carried, though they were strangers. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with things neither dared to voice. From inside the cabin came the scrape of a chair. Her father was stirring. Panic flared in her chest. "You need to go," she urged, fear threading her voice. "Now!" The man studied her, jaw clenched. Then, with a curt nod, he mounted his horse again. "Thank you," he said, tipping his hat. And just like that, he was gone, the sound of hooves fading into the trees. She stood rooted, the bundle of sticks slipping from her arms. Her heart hammered, not with fear alone, but with something she had almost forgotten how to feel, possibility. But as the cabin door creaked open and her father's voice cut through the morning, Who were you talking to? That fragile spark of hope was smothered by dread. Her mouth went dry. She turned slowly, forcing her face into a mask of calm. No one, she lied, praying he would believe. His eyes narrowed, suspicion sharpening. His eyes narrowed, suspicion sharpening. He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing hers. Don't play games with me, girl. Her chest tightened, but she held his gaze silent. For the first time, she felt the faintest echo of defiance stir inside her. The stranger's eyes still burned in her memory, steady and unyielding. Something had shifted, and her father sensed it. The rest of the morning dragged under her father's watchful eye. He seemed to circle her like a predator circling prey, his questions sharp, his gaze sharper. Every time she moved, she felt his suspicion pressing into her back, as if he could smell the lie clinging to her skin. By midday, she was sent to the river to wash clothes. He lingered on the porch, rifle leaning against the post, pretending to smoke his pipe. But she knew he was watching. Always watching. She knelt at the riverbank, dipping garments into the icy water until her hands burned. The river's current tugged at her sleeves, carrying away the soap bubbles and dirt. But her thoughts weren't on the work. They were on the man with the steady eyes. The stranger. She hated herself for it. Hated the dangerous warmth that sparked inside her at the memory of his voice. She had learned long ago that warmth was fleeting, snuffed out the moment her father decided to remind her who held the power. Still, the thought of him lingered, like the sun breaking briefly through storm clouds. Then came the rustle of footsteps behind her. Heavy, sure, not her father's uneven gait. She turned, breath-catching. He was there. The stranger. His horse grazed a few paces back, tethered to a sapling. He crouched at the river's edge, filling a canteen, but his eyes found hers instantly. You again, he murmured, voice pitched low, as though aware of the danger his presence posed. Her pulse raced. You shouldn't be here. I know. His gaze flicked toward the cabin up the hill, where smoke curled lazily from the chimney. But I reckon you shouldn't be here either. The words hit her harder than she expected, like a truth she'd buried too deep suddenly unearthed. She looked down at her raw, red hands gripping the wet fabric. It's not that simple. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the river's song. Then softer, almost tentative, he asked, He hurt you, didn't he? Her throat closed. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to pretend she was stronger than she was. But the bruise on her cheek and the weight in her heart betrayed her. She said nothing. That silence was enough. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with something like anger, but not at her. At the man in the cabin, at the life she was trapped in. She opened her mouth to tell him to leave, to save himself before her father spotted him. But a shout ripped across the clearing. Girl! Her father's voice, closer than she'd thought. Panic clawed up her chest. She scrambled to gather the half-washed clothes, shoving them into the basket. Go, she hissed, eyes wide. But the stranger didn't move. Not right away. He looked at her with a steadiness that made her feel seen, truly seen for the first time in years. Then, finally, he mounted his horse in one smooth motion. Before he turned into the trees, he leaned forward in the saddle. His voice was quiet but urgent. If you ever need a way out, look for me. I won't let you die here. And then he was gone, swallowed by the forest, his words echoing louder than the river. She barely had time to wipe her face before her father stormed down the path, eyes narrowing. He scanned the trees, nostrils flaring like a wolf catching the faint scent of prey. Who were you talking to? He demanded, voice low and dangerous. Her heart pounded, but she lifted the basket, letting the dripping clothes speak for her. No one. The lie hung heavy in the air. His eyes stayed on her a moment longer, suspicion burning hot, before he turned toward the trees. I'll find out, he growled. Don't think I won't, and in that moment, she knew two things. Her father's grip on her was tightening, and the stranger had planted a seed of hope too dangerous to ignore. The cabin walls felt closer with each passing day, as though the logs themselves leaned inward, conspiring with her father to keep her caged. He spoke less now, his silence heavy, broken only by sharp commands or the scrape of his boots on the floor. But it was the way he looked at her, eyes narrowed, suspicion alive in every glance, that told her he had not forgotten the river. Every chore became a test. Fetch water? His gaze followed her until she disappeared down the path. Gather firewood? He counted the logs as though they might reveal who she had met between the trees. Even in sleep she could not escape. She woke to the sound of floorboards creaking, his shadow bending over her bed. One evening, as the fire crackled low, he spoke. His voice was calm, too calm. "You've been keeping secrets." Her hands trembled where they stitched a tear in his coat. "I don't know what you mean." The needle slipped, pricking her finger. A drop of blood stained the fabric. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to send sparks of pain up her arm. "Don't lie to me, girl." Her breath came in shallow gasps. Fear choked her, but beneath it something else stirred. Anger. A quiet, desperate anger that dared to whisper she deserved more than this life of trembling. Still she said nothing. At last he released her, tossing her hand aside like broken kindling. He leaned back, eyes glittering. "You'll see. I'll find out soon enough." That night she lay awake long after the fire died, staring at the beams above her bed. Her pulse thrummed with dread. She knew her father's temper, knew it would not rest until it exploded, and when it did, she would be the one crushed beneath it. The storm came 2 days later. A wind howled through the trees, shaking the cabin, rattling shutters. Her father sent her out to secure the animals in the lean-to. The cold cut through her dress, icy rain soaking her hair, plastering it to her face. She struggled with the latch, fingers numb, when a sudden crack split the air. Not thunder. A gunshot. She froze. Another shot rang out, closer. Her father's voice bellowed from inside the cabin. "Stay where you are." But fear propelled her forward, feet slipping in the mud as she stumbled toward the tree line. And there, between the trunks, through the curtain of rain, she saw him. The stranger. He crouched low, rifle raised, eyes scanning the clearing. Water dripped from the brim of his hat, his jaw clenched tight. He looked like a ghost pulled from the storm, dangerous and alive. Their eyes met, even across the distance. She felt the same jolt she had at the river, fear and hope colliding, leaving her breathless. "Get back inside!" Her father roared. He burst from the cabin, shotgun in hand, fury painted across his face. The stranger didn't move. His rifle stayed raised, steady as stone, though his gaze shifted between her and the man who had held her captive all her life. The world seemed to hold its breath. Rain pelted the ground, thunder rolled in the distance, and she stood between them, daughter and prisoner, woman and survivor, caught in a moment that felt like it would decide everything. The storm raged like a living thing, tearing branches from trees, flattening the tall grass, and drowning the night in sheets of rain. Her father's voice cut through the chaos, low and venomous. "You!" His shotgun leveled at the figure beyond the trees. "I warned you once. You won't get a second chance." The stranger didn't flinch. His rifle gleamed wet in the stormlight, steady in his grip. "She doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice calm, deep, carrying over the thunder. Her father barked a laugh, ugly and sharp. "She's mine. Blood and bone, and no wandering bastard's gonna take her away." Her chest constricted. The words dug into her like chains tightening around her ribs. All her life she'd been treated like property, like a possession to be guarded, beaten, silenced. But in the stranger's words, "She doesn't belong to you," she heard something new. Freedom. Inside, girl. Her father snapped, shoving the shotgun barrel toward her without taking his eyes off the man across the clearing. She hesitated, mud soaking her hem, hair plastered against her face. Her silence was answer enough. Her father's face darkened, rage rising like floodwaters. "You dare defy me?" And then, as though the storm itself demanded an answer, lightning split the sky, illuminating everything in a blinding flash. The stranger moved, stepping forward, rifle trained. "Don't make her choose," he said. His voice wasn't pleading, it was a warning. Her father cocked the shotgun, his finger tightening on the trigger. For a heartbeat, she saw it clearly. 2 men locked in hatred, and she the prize. If she stayed silent, blood would spill. If she spoke, if she acted, it could change everything. Her body trembled, but her voice rose, breaking through the thunder. "I'm not yours." The words shocked even her. They tore from her throat, raw, jagged, years of swallowed screams breaking free. Her father's head whipped toward her, his eyes burning with betrayal. "You ungrateful," he lunged, hand closing around her wrist, dragging her toward him. Pain seared through her arm. For a moment she thought the stranger would fire, but he didn't. His eyes stayed locked on her, as if urging her to take the final step herself. And she did. Her free hand shot downward, scooping up a jagged stone from the mud. With all the strength in her shaking body, she swung. The rock struck her father's temple with a sickening thud. His grip loosened. He staggered, stunned, cursing as blood mingled with rain. The stranger's rifle fired, not at her father, but into the air. A thunderclap that silenced even the storm. "Let her go," he commanded. For once, her father obeyed. He stumbled back, hatred carved into every line of his face, but his balance was broken. He spat blood into the mud, eyes seething, and retreated toward the cabin. Mud, eyes seething, and retreated toward the cabin. "This ain't over," he snarled. Not by a long shot. The door slammed shut, her chest heaved, every breath jagged. The stone slipped from her fingers, lost in the mud. She stood shaking, caught between terror and something far more dangerous. Hope. The stranger lowered his rifle, his gaze softening as it settled on her. "You did that," he said quietly. "Not me. You." The storm still raged, but for the first time the sound didn't terrify her. It felt like the world was washing itself clean. She met his eyes, her voice unsteady but alive. "Then help me finish it." The storm passed by dawn, leaving the land drenched and broken. Branches littered the ground, puddles shone like shards of glass, and the cabin sat hunched against the pale light of morning. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with unspoken threats. She sat at the table, hands folded tightly in her lap, the bruise on her wrist already blooming purple. Across from her, her father sharpened his knife in slow, deliberate strokes, the rasp of steel against stone louder than words. Every scrape carried a promise, and her throat ached from silence. But she did not speak. She could still feel the stranger's eyes on her, the way his words had cut through the storm. "You did that." The memory burned like a brand. At last, her father lifted the knife, testing the edge with his thumb. His eyes flicked up, pinning her like an animal. "You think one night of rebellion changes anything?" His voice was low, calm in a way that made her stomach twist. "You're still mine. You'll always be mine." Her heart hammered, but this time she didn't lower her gaze. The door creaked. She flinched, but it wasn't him, it was the stranger. He stepped inside, water dripping from his coat, rifle slung across his shoulder. His presence filled the room, steady and quiet, like the mountain itself had walked through the door. Her father's lips curled into a sneer. "You've got guts, boy. I'll give you that. But guts get spilled easy." The stranger's voice was even. "I don't want blood. I just want her safe." "Safe?" Her father barked a laugh. "She's safer here than she'd ever be with the likes of you." The stranger's eyes flicked toward her, a question in them, though he said nothing. He didn't need to. She understood. It was her turn to speak, her turn to choose. Her hands trembled against the table. Fear screamed inside her, reminding her of every beating, every night she'd prayed to disappear into the dark. But beneath it, something stronger stirred, a quiet resolve, fragile but alive. "She's not safer here," she whispered. Then louder, her voice cracking but sure. "I'm not safer here." The words shattered the silence. Her father's chair scraped back violently as he stood, the knife gleaming in his fist. "You dare—" The stranger moved before the blade could rise. In a heartbeat, his rifle was no longer slung but raised, barrel steady. His tone was calm, but it held the weight of a warning that could not be ignored. "Don't." For a moment, the room was a tinderbox, one spark away from exploding. Her father's chest heaved, eyes blazing, but he didn't move. "Not yet. You'll regret this," he spat. "Both of you." The knife clattered onto the table, not out of surrender, but out of strategy. He turned, shoulders rigid, and stormed out the door, the slam rattling the cabin walls. Her knees gave way beneath her. She sank into the chair, breath shaking, tears threatening to spill. The stranger lowered his rifle but didn't step closer. He gave her space, his voice soft. "You're stronger than you know." She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat wild and defiant. For the first time, she believed him. The silence after her father's departure was heavier than the storm had been. The slam of the door still echoed in her bones, and though the knife lay abandoned on the table, it seemed to glint with unfinished threats. She sat frozen, staring at it, her breath shallow. "He'll come back," she whispered. The stranger's steady gaze never left her. "Yes, but next time we'll be ready." The words should have reassured her, but instead they sparked a tremor deep inside. We. It was the first time anyone had ever stood with her against the man she feared most. Yet the thought of what her father might do, how far his rage might reach, turned that spark into fire. "What if he kills you?" she asked, voice raw. "Then I'll die knowing I tried." His tone was calm, resolute, as if death was a price he'd already accepted. Tears blurred her vision. No one had ever spoken like that for her sake. For so long, survival had meant silence, obedience, swallowing every cry. Now this stranger was offering more than protection. He was offering choice. And choice was terrifying. Outside, boots crunched in the mud, distant but deliberate. She tensed. The stranger lifted a hand, motioning her to stay quiet. He crossed to the window, peered out, and his jaw tightened. Her father hadn't left alone. 2 men trailed behind him. Men from town she recognized. Drinking partners, troublemakers with eyes as mean as wolves. They carried rifles slung loose, their laughter carried by the damp morning air. "They're not just coming for me," the stranger murmured. "He means to make an example of both of us." Her pulse raced. "What do we do?" He turned to her, his voice steady but urgent. "Decide. If you want to stay, I'll walk out that door alone and draw them off. But if you're ready, truly ready, you come with me. We'll fight our way clear. We won't stop running until you're free." Her breath caught. The room swayed with the weight of it. Staying meant change she'd known all her life. Leaving meant fire, danger, the unknown. Her father's voice boomed outside, coarse and mocking. "Come on out, boy. Or are you hiding behind my daughter's skirts?" Heat rushed to her cheeks, anger, shame, fear tangled together. She clenched her fists, the bruise on her wrist throbbing like a reminder of every night she'd prayed for deliverance. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said, her voice trembling but firm. The stranger's eyes softened, just for a moment before hardening again with resolve. He handed her a small revolver, its grip worn smooth. "Then stand with me." Her fingers curled around the weapon. It was heavier than she imagined, the weight of decision pressing into her palm. Outside, boots drew nearer. The creak of the porch boards groaned under the men's steps. The stranger leveled his rifle at the door. "Stay behind me. And whatever happens, don't let him break you again." The doorknob rattled. Her father's voice cut through the wood, venomous and certain. "You'll regret this, girl. I swear on my blood." The stranger met her eyes one last time. No words were needed. The storm had only just begun. The door shuddered under the force of the kick. Hinges screamed, splinters flew, and the cabin filled with the sudden rush of cold morning air. Her father stood in the threshold, broad-shouldered and wild-eyed, with 2 armed men flanking him. His grin was cruel, sharpened by drink and years of unchecked power. "Well, ain't this a pretty sight," he drawled, eyes cutting from her to the stranger. "My own blood hiding behind some worthless drifter." Her body trembled, but this time she didn't shrink. The revolver felt like an anchor in her hand, grounding her to the floorboards. Behind her fear was something else, a fragile thread of defiance that the stranger's presence had stitched together. "Leave us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father's laughter cracked through the room like a whip. "Leave, girl, you've lost your wits. You belong to me." He jabbed a finger toward the stranger. "And he belongs in the ground." The men raised their rifles. The stranger's stance shifted, calm and ready, his weapon steady at his shoulder. The room was thick with tension, the kind that hummed before lightning split the sky. "Think carefully," the stranger called out, his voice even. "You fire that gun and not all of you walk away," her father sneered. "You think you can take us all?" "Ain't that fast." The stranger's eyes flicked briefly to her. "Sometimes it ain't about being fast. It's about being willing." The words struck deep. She realized he wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking about her too. Her father stepped forward, boots thudding heavy against the floorboards. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with bruising force. The smell of whiskey and sweat overwhelmed her as his face hovered close, spit flying with his rage. "You're coming home with me," he hissed. "And when I'm done with him, you'll remember who you belong to." For a heartbeat, she froze. Old fear surged. Memories of nights where she'd stayed silent, of mornings where hope had felt like a sin. But this time she had a weapon. This time she had a choice. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Let her go," the stranger warned, his voice sharp, his rifle trained on her father's chest. Her father snarled and yanked her closer, using her as a shield. The revolver shook in her hand, pressed against his side. "You won't shoot me," he growled. "You ain't got it in you." Tears blurred her vision, but rage cut through the haze. "You don't know me anymore." The shot thundered in the small cabin. Her father roared in pain, stumbling back, clutching his side. The grip on her arm loosened, and she staggered free, the revolver smoking in her trembling hands. Chaos erupted. The stranger fired, dropping one of the hired guns before the man could pull his trigger. The other dove for cover, returning fire, bullets splintering the walls. Her ears rang, her chest heaved, and yet she stood. For the first time in her life, she had not bowed. The stranger moved with precision, reloading quickly, his voice cutting through the noise. "Stay down!" But she didn't. She stood in the open, revolver still raised, staring at her father who writhed on the floor, his face twisted in hate and disbelief. She had pulled the trigger. The silence inside her was broken forever. Trigger. The silence inside her was broken forever. Gunfire tore through the cabin, wood splintering as bullets chewed holes in the walls. Smoke and dust thickened the air, choking every breath. The stranger barked for her to move, but her legs were rooted to the floorboards. Her revolver shaking in her grip as her father groaned and cursed from where he had fallen. The stranger lunged forward, grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the door. "We can't stay penned in here," he shouted, slamming his shoulder against the frame. Another bullet whistled past, grazing his sleeve. They burst out onto the porch, the morning sun blinding after the gloom of the cabin. The second hired gun crouched behind a trough, his rifle glinting. He fired. The shot split the air, and the porch post beside her head exploded into shards. The stranger rolled off the porch, returning fire. His bullet struck true. The man toppled back into the dirt, his rifle clattering from his hand. Silence followed, broken only by the groan of her wounded father dragging himself toward the doorway. "You think this ends here?" he spat, blood seeping through his shirt. His voice was ragged, but his hatred burned unbroken. "You'll always be mine, girl. No man can change that." Her chest heaved, every word cutting into her like barbed wire. The revolver weighed heavy in her hand, the decision pressing down harder than the gunmetal itself. She could end it now. One more shot, and she would never have to hear his voice again. The stranger climbed back onto the porch, breathing hard, his eyes flicking from her to the man on the floor. "It's your choice," he said quietly. "But once you do it, there's no going back." Her father coughed, sneering even through his pain. "You ain't got the spine. You're weak, just like your ma was." The words struck like a lash. She remembered her mother's broken spirit, her silent tears, the way her body had carried the weight of his cruelty until it broke. The revolver steadied in her grip. For the first time, she didn't feel like a child. "I'm not her," she whispered. Her father's smirk faltered, but the stranger stepped forward, placing a hand gently over her trembling wrist. His touch was firm, grounding. "You already proved your strength," he told her. "You don't need to waste your soul on him. Walk away, live." The world narrowed to the weight of that choice. Kill him and silence the threat forever, or leave him to the law of blood and time, and prove she wasn't bound to his cycle of violence. Her arm lowered, slow and trembling. The revolver slipped from her hand and clattered against the porch. Her father's laugh came bitter and jagged. "You'll regret this." But as she looked at him writhing in the dirt, she realized the regret had already shifted. It belonged to him now, the man who no longer held power over her. The stranger kicked his gun away, keeping his rifle trained as he backed her toward the waiting horse. "We've got to move," he said urgently. "Others will come." She climbed into the saddle, her heart hammering, her body shaking with the aftermath of what she had done, and what she had refused to do. As the horse thundered away from the cabin, the sound of her father's curses fading behind them, a sob tore from her throat. But beneath it, buried deep, was something new, a spark, beginning. For the first time in her life, she was free. The horse's hooves pounded against the earth, carrying them farther from the smoke curling above the cabin. Every stride seemed to shake loose the weight pressing on her chest. Yet her father's voice still echoed in her ears like a ghost that refused to be silenced. She clung to the stranger, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. His shirt smelled of sweat, leather, and gunpowder. It should have frightened her. Instead, it steadied her, proof that someone else bore the same fight, the same fire to live. When the forest swallowed them, shadows cooled the heat of the sun. He slowed the horse to a trot, guiding them through thickets and narrow deer paths only a man of the wild could know. Not a word passed between them, but she felt the tension in his body, every muscle alert for the chase that might follow. At last, when the silence of the woods held steady, he reined in near a small clearing. A brook trickled nearby, its water catching the fractured light of dusk. He slid from the saddle and helped her down gently, as though she were made of glass. "You did well," he said at last, his voice low, roughened by smoke and grit. She shook her head, her throat tight. "I couldn't do it." "I should have ended him." His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. "You did the harder thing. You chose not to be him." Her lips parted, but no words came. A shiver coursed through her, as if the truth in his voice had stripped her bare. For years she had believed her only strength would come from fighting his way, and yet here she stood, alive, her hands trembling but unstained. He busied himself with gathering wood for a fire, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who had lived long on the edge of wilderness. She knelt by the brook, cupping water in her hands. Her reflection rippled back at her, eyes swollen from tears, face marked with dirt and blood. But behind it all, a woman stared back, not the girl who had cowered under her father's shadow. When the fire crackled to life, painting the clearing in warm gold, they sat across from one another. The silence stretched, not heavy but fragile, as though neither dared to break the strange bond that had begun to form. "Why did you save me?" she asked finally. He leaned back, staring into the flames. "Because I know what it is to live under a man's cruelty, and I know what it takes to claw your way free." Her chest tightened. She wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers of his past, but the pain in his eyes told her his scars were not ready to be spoken. Still, the answer was enough. It bound them in unspoken understanding. The night deepened. An owl hooted from somewhere above, and the cold began to creep in. He rose, shrugging off his coat, and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. The weight of it was heavy, the warmth immediate. "You'll need your strength," he said simply. For a long moment, she studied him in the firelight, the hard lines of his face softened by shadow, the gentleness hidden beneath his roughness, and for the first time, she wondered if the wilderness was not just a place to escape, but a place to begin again. Place to begin again.